Well, it's my pleasure to welcome Kelly Swanson, master storyteller, professional speaker, podcaster, author, an amazingly talented woman who has, I think, a shared background with me in that she doesn't just tell stories, she acts them out. And she doesn't just ad lib stories, she knows what she's doing. She understands the craft of story. She writes, she rehearses, she, delivers amazing humor, amazing comedy. But predicated on all of this being able to work is mastery, storytelling mastery, taking it really, really seriously. So Kelly Swanson, welcome, welcome, welcome to the Storytelling That Sticks for Business and Life podcast.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here, Doug. And I got to tell all your listeners, almost said readers, dear and gentle reader, can you tell them I'm watching Bridgerton? I've got to say, a lot of what I implement, I learned from you, whether you realize it or not. I find myself quoting you often, and I got several life-changing ahas from you. You came to our chapter a long time ago,
What
and
chapter was
I just
that?
wanted North Carolina.
The Carolinas.
Yes, it was a
Been there a
long
couple
time
times.
ago,
Been there a couple times. Great chapter.
but you have heavily influenced and impacted my work. So thank you.
Well, you're quite welcome. So the first thing I'd like to do, because I know you, a lot of people in the professional speaking business know you, and all of your clients know you, but my audience doesn't know you. They're just interested in storytelling and how do you find your stories? How do you craft your stories? How do you get into stories? But you have, like me, taken storytelling to a whole different level. You've made it your career. You've made it your niche. So explain to me, help us understand, what is your story? How did you evolve into professional speaking and eventually storytelling itself?
Well, a series of accidents, that's for sure. None of it was planned. Um, when I was young, I was picked on. Not saying that to get your sympathy. Most of us were picked on, but very introverted, had no friends, and I escaped into the world of story. I created my own town, all my characters. Story was my refuge for so long. And so they delighted me. The characters made me happy. I disappeared in their stories. Fast forward, well, eventually they tumbled out of my head onto paper and never thought I would do anything with any of that. I wasn't even driven to really get a career. I was just going to get married, have kids, find a job, whatever, do. And, but I would continue my stories. I majored in English because I didn't know what else to major in, thought that was good in college. And my roommates would come over and I'd have my town on paper on the wall. And they'd be like, what is that? And I was like, well, Bitsy lives over here. And I just had this whole imaginary reality, which it sounds weird now, but in my speaking business, now I look at it and go, wow, we really do write the story of the world that we live in. I won't go too deep into that because I'll finish answering your question. So I tumbled into a community college class for writers after I graduated. I was bored. A bunch of teachers were taking the class. We had to read our stories for credit. Nobody had ever really heard my stories except maybe some family and a few friends. And the teachers were like, wow, your story's good, but the way you tell it is even better. Would you come to our schools? I was like, really? You'll pay me to do this? And I was like, beer money, yay. And so I started going to schools, quickly realized I didn't like doing it for the children. There was an adult in the room who said, you're a storyteller. Join the North Carolina Storytelling Guild. And Doug, I got dropped in this world full of storytellers as artists. They weren't, and you know what I mean, and went to the storytelling festival. I was like, oh, this is who I want to be. And how in the world do you make a living at that? I mean, even in the entertainment world, nobody knew where do you put this? And it was raw and unpolished, blah, blah, blah. Then I met a woman named Jeannie Robertson 20 years ago, and she was at a festival. Well, she was the big name, and I was, telling stories under a tent. And she said, the speaking world is the world that will pay you to tell those stories. Go here. And Doug, from day one, people would ask me how I was doing what I was doing. Other speakers, how are you? Why are they laughing? How are you getting them to eat out of the palm of your hand? How are you? You know, all these thought leaders and heavy content people that were so impressive to me and I knew nothing about were all coming to me because they recognized the power of a story. And that's snowballed. And so my career has been, I still am the artist. That's who I want to be. I want to get up and I want to tell the stories and make you laugh and make you feel, but I can also show you how I do it.
Well, no, your trajectory and mine are very, very similar in that when I got up and shared my streaking story at my Colorado chapter of the National
Yeah.
Speakers Association, the same thing happened. People said, what are you doing? How are you doing that? And so when I saw you speak at the Colorado chapter of the National Speakers Association all those many years ago, I went, now I see that there is this unique niche in the world of speakers who do theater, who choose, craft, and deliver a story. But I think the challenge for you and the challenge for me was coming into professional speaking is, okay, I can tell one hell of a story and I'm entertaining as hell and I can get them to laugh. What's the point?
Right.
Is there a relevant point that somebody in business would be willing to pay for? Can I teach something that they need to learn that they're willing to pay for? So how did you start to move from this storytelling world of, well, all of these people are telling great stories, but there's no lesson that a corporation would ever paid for, to what Jeannie Robertson introduced you to? Is like, this is the world of business. These are corporations and associations, and they want you to come in, but they want you to give them something relevant, something that they can use that will help them sell more, be better leaders, be inspirational, be persuasive. So how did you evolve your folk stories? Because you've got this, this fairy tale that you've got. You took this imaginary world with all these characters, which was like a fairy tale, but you were able to evolve that into a business message. Tell me a little bit about that evolution.
Sure. And Jeannie, she was my mentor for a little while in the beginning, and well, all the way through, but one of the first things she said was, there's going to be something hard for you to do that storytellers don't do, but that you're going to have to do over here. You're going to have to tell the story, and then you're going to need to tell me what I just learned from that. And I went, oh, gross. I don't want to do that. That's spoon feeding them. Why would I do that? She said that this world, they want you to tell them what you just taught them. And it is so true. Well, for me, it was really eye-opening because I had to go back. The stories were already entertaining, but I wasn't sure what some of them meant. You know, I had to go back and really look at, just as I do a story now, when I see a moment in time and I go, there's a story there. I don't start writing it. I think about why that moment means so much to me and what is the lesson I'm learning in this moment. Why am I going to remember this? What is the point of this story? And that's, I came in this business as an entertainer who has tons of great stories, but I had to go, wait a minute, this isn't enough. It's, what's the point you're making? And why do they care about this point? Why should they care about this story? And it comes down to the lesson, because a lot of people think, well, if you're telling stories about your kids and they don't have kids, then you can't tell that story. I'm like, no, that's not true. Every story has a human emotion in it. That's just the setting and the plot of it. But you have to figure out what the intent of this story is and what they're the takeaway is.
When you have an idea for a story, don't just go ahead and start developing that story until you've been able to understand or decide on what is the relevance to my audience. How will if I'm going to go to a sales conference and talk about storytelling, how will they be able to use this in a sales conversation?
Right.
So the ability to analyze, what did I just do? Because I'm amazed that you say that, because that's exactly what I started out doing. I would tell a story and I'd say, let me tell you what I just did. Let me break it down. Let me analyze for you what I just did. And over the years, as I was teaching this, I learned it. I had to figure out, they keep asking me questions. And every time they ask me a question, I have to figure out, well, what is the answer to that question? And then I can teach it. So you are now a corporate speaker. You have taken this absolutely unique and amazing talent. And I believe, coming from the Carolinas, you come from a storytelling tradition that was all around you. Am I correct?
Well, I think a lot of us were in our families and in our cultures and in our churches and in our but so I don't know if it was just a Southern thing, but I grew up in the South. Nobody, you didn't have any money. You were all rural. People came around on Sunday afternoons. You sat around and you told stories and you ate, and the same stories were repeated over and over. So I did grow up in a culture of storytelling. But
You took this from a place of, I understand story based on, I've grown up with story. I retreated off into story as a place for me to hide and play and experiment because I was getting bullied and I didn't know what to do with it. Eventually, people started to say, wow, this is really entertaining. Come and do this. And you sort of stumbled into it, but now you have captured it.
yes, there's a strategy to it, because other people will tell stories and they'll ramble all over the place and they'll never get anywhere. And when it's done well or done right, I think that's important to note, because a lot of storytellers, if you hear my mother tell a story, you'll never get to the end of it. It'll start 3 days ago with what she had for breakfast. And I hope she doesn't listen, but she doesn't know what a podcast is. So, but I think it has to be done well, because I was a musician growing up. I was a pianist. They wanted me to be a concert pianist. I didn't like playing for people, oddly enough. Now I'm doing this. But when you learn the piano, it was a tool. You learned the chords, you learned the fingering, you learned the notes. You had to play it the way they said. You had the metronome. You were given music. Then you were given a little bit more advanced, and you played it the way it was written. And then at some point you took it on as your own, and then you became a musician, and you could take the audience on a journey and add your own notes and blah, 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 blah. Story is an instrument that we have in this world, and especially if we're speakers, and you can play that story, and I know you know what I mean, like it's an instrument. And when you start to figure out, well, wait a minute, if I put the notes here, or I take more of a pause here, or I take this word out, and what if it's faster now and it's slower now, you can play that audience like a violin. And that's what a lot of people don't know. Most people are not going to go to the obscene lengths that I will go to with my craft, because it's my craft and I love it. But people often don't realize, Doug, they just throw a story out there and think that it's their data where that's going to matter more. And they don't realize that if they played with the notes, especially with humor, I mean, you know that if you play with the notes and the spacing and get it tight, like somebody writing a song would do, the difference is unbelievable. It's an instrument.
Well, I've often used the analogy that your story is a song.
Yes.
And you need to write the lyrics.
Yep.
And you need to write the melody. And you need to, get it down and memorize it just like you would a song. Understand the notes, understand the music, understand where it goes fast and slow and high and low. And then when you get in front of an audience, you need to sing the hell out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when I talk about singing your story, it lends a different nuance to it, just like what you're saying, because I interview so many people about this and they talk about storytelling, but you and I don't just tell stories. We make them come alive with theater, with acting, with nuance, with volume, with, because you understand humor. I mean, I've watched you tell stories and I just watch the nuance, the dance, the rhythm, the tempo, the highs, the lows, the way you use your voice and your Southern accent and all that. It's like the beauty of it, when taken to a very high level, is what I call mastery. And that's what I'm talking about with you today, is mastery. So you've written the book called The Story Formula. Can you share a little bit about the story formula? And after you share a little bit about this, I want you to tell us a story.
Okay. Nope. The story formula isn't really focused on the mastery. It's focused on the structure, because you have to get the structure down. Now, also, I wrote the story formula with the intent that these stories are used to persuade people in business and in life, not for novelists or somebody writing a one-woman show, though a lot of the things overlap. I wrote that with the intent of a story is about you, it, and them. And I won't go too deep into it. It's the marriage of uh, those three things. So you've got to make it real clear that a story is a character. It's about a person, you know, who has a problem or conflict or a pain or a desire. There's an emotion attached to it. And then there's a resolution or some kind of, there's a journey they take to it getting some sort of a resolution and getting fixed. And there's emotion attached to that. And then there's a victory and there's emotion attached to that. And then there's a happy ever after moment, you know, a couple of years, the new normal and emotion attached to that. And then a lesson. And I know that a lot of us who study story and who teach story and speeches and whatnot come at it with, we all have different ways to get there. So it's not the be all end all, but the story formula really is about understanding that you need to work on the structure of this before you go into characters and humor. And everybody wants to start with the fun stuff, and you just need to start with the meat of it. And it's, again, starting with, why are you telling me this story? What do you want me to think, feel, or do as a result of hearing the story? So when I'm going into a business, I'm not looking at, hey, how do you tell your company story in a way that sounds exciting? Though you want that. It's, how do you tell that company your story in a way that humanizes your brand, you, the person telling it, and taps into the human being who's going to use that product? How do we merge all three of those together, you, it, and them, and tell a story about who you are? That's kind of what the story formula is about.
What you're basically saying is you start with an idea for a story, you decide what is the utility, what's the point or lesson, and then you sit down and you start to craft it using a formula.
Yes.
I have my 9 steps of story structure. You have your story formula. Everybody's the hero's journey. They're all the same thing. They're just different versions of the same thing. We all borrow from each other and mush it around, but it all comes out and it's like, there's a character, they go off on a journey, they encounter an obstacle, they overcome the obstacle, they have an aha moment, and there's a life lesson. It's like, oh, it's the same stuff all the time. But what you and I are saying is, we start with an idea for a story, but then we sit down and we get to work. And people want to be amazing storytellers, but sometimes they resist writing.
Right. They want to take one
down and writing it, working with a formula and then writing it. Because without the structure, it can fall apart and you can go off on tangents and you can get lost. And what I say all the time is, when you go off on tangents, your audience follows you. When you get lost in story, your audience gets lost with you. And if you can't find your way back, they're left adrift.
Yes.
And you haven't done them a service. So you better know what you're doing.
Right.
Otherwise, you're just being rude and wasting people's times.
Agreed. It's like, it's going back to the piano reference.
Right.
Too many people want to sit down and play, and they didn't learn the chords and they didn't learn how to play, and they didn't learn the instrument. Now, somebody, I guess, could write it for you, but there's the script and then there's the delivery, which are two very, those are equally important. Is, here's how you've, and to write it the way it's to be told, not written. I mean, that's a lot of people, I think, when they look at a piece of paper to write a story, they think like in school, okay, open up your notebooks, write a story about summer vacation. And you're right, they just start writing, hoping it gets somewhere. I did that with my stories forever. I didn't plan them. I just wrote hoping I'd get to a good place. And then they wonder why they have such a hard time memorizing the speech and telling it, or why it doesn't sound authentic, because you wrote heretofore in it. You didn't even write it in the way you talk. And that's something we also didn't really tap into, which I struggle with, is how to also be authentic and organic up here on this stage in a world where too commercial, too polished can work against you. And that's, I haven't really figured out the answer, because you're right. When I'm telling a story, I'm performing it like it's a piece of music. And then I step back and go, well, wait, was I authentic enough? Was I organic enough? Was I, because we see other speakers who get so canned in their delivery that you're like, wait, just talk to me like a real human being does.
You need to know what you're doing. And what you're alluding to there is the scripting process. I call it talk onto paper, talk and transcribe.
Yes.
Capturing your organic voice in your scripting so that your script is exactly the way you talk. It has run-on sentences, it has
Yes.
incomplete sentences,
Yes.
it has redundancy.
Yes.
But basically, you, Kelly Swanson, are capturing Kelly. The way
Yes.
you talk when you're hanging out with your buddies, the way you're
Yes.
talking to me right now, you're trying to capture Kelly's rhythm and tempo and her humor and her goofiness. And you're trying to capture all of that and not clean it up and not
Right.
polish it out, not try and make it sound like Jeannie Robertson
Right.
or Doug
Right.
Stevenson
Right.
or Tim Gard or anybody else, because you are uniquely Kelly and that's what works. When I saw you, it's like, I have not seen that before in NSA. Now I want to move forward into this concept of being able to take your world, your concept, your fairy tale, your Plum Hollow, your unique things that are like so you. Because I mean, I'm from Chicago, inner city Chicago. You start talking about Plum Hollow and the
Yeah.
characters in Plum Hollow or whatever, and I'm like, what are you talking about? So you've got to somehow be able to take that and make it relevant to me, a guy who grew up in an apartment in inner city Chicago. So how do you take your organic truth, your organic life, and not try and polish it up, but just try and say, how can I make it relevant to everybody
Right.
and
And
not
you're
lose
kind of
myself in the process,
and you're tapping
which is hard.
into my biggest challenge, my biggest fear, my biggest rush, because I have always wanted to take people in my business audience to an imaginary place where we all learned the power of story. And it's scary because different doesn't sell very well. It's hard to, and so, selling it is hard. I had a particular group that I was in front of recently, and they were mostly men, and they sell like equipment, like excavating equipment. And I'm about to throw up in my mouth going, there is no way they're going to follow me here. And I was like, Kelly, it's too late. You decided during COVID that life was short, that you're not going to sit on this way that you want to be anymore. You're going to do, because I played it conventionally, Doug, for years. I did the
Did
part.
I? So
I,
did
I
I.
did. And then COVID, I was like, I'm not doing this anymore. We're going to get a Pride's Hollow Gazette. I'm going to have Earl call me and tell me stories. I'm going to have a coin that lands in the town, and I flip it. I mean, you just wouldn't even recognize what's in my head right now. So I get in front of this group of excavators, and I'm like, but luckily I'd thought about it in advance. I thought, this is going to freak them out. It's going to be different. They're not going to know what to do with this. And I told myself, put more men stories in here. Tell the story about Grandpa teaching Douglas how to ride a bike. Get some more stories in here that men will resonate with. Don't tell Bitsy's waxing party in front of this group. So I knew in advance, and here's what I did to combat that. First of all, I created it the way I thought. It's my art, and if everybody hated it, you're going to like the next speaker that comes along. I've got to do it this way. But I also prefaced it where, just for them, I didn't go all right in as I did with other audiences into the drama, into the in the middle of a tiny town tucked beyond where you have been. There is a concrete fountain. Okay, I didn't start that way with them because I knew that would just be too much for them. So I started practical. And I won't bore you with all the details, but I broke my drama rule of and this was a breakout. It wasn't a keynote, but it was a big breakout in which we were all delivering keynotes in our breakouts, if you know what I mean. I
Oh,
mean,
I
it
do.
wasn't
I do.
okay. So what I did was I basically said, hey, we all stand in different places. I said something powerful. And then I said, we all are in different places in our industry. But there's some things we all have in common. We want to get business and we want to keep it. We want to have everybody working towards a vision, not away from it. We got to deal with disruptions. So I named all these things and they're all nodding. And I'm like, okay. And I said, we would all agree that when we're trying to do this, then communicating effectively is a skill that's necessary. They all nod. Yes, yes, da 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 da. So we all have these moments where we want to communicate effectively, but the problem is we stop here. And then I take them to this next place. I call it my argument, setting up why I'm here and why this matters.
Right.
And I said, here's the problem. In these moments of influence that we have, we quickly realize that telling people what to do and making them want to do it is not the same thing, is it? They're like, no, there's a difference in manipulating and motivating. There's a difference in telling people everything you have and making them want to buy into it. There's a difference in telling them you're the expert and making them believe you. The difference is story. And they're all like, and I said, I've spent my life studying story. And I said, here's my philosophy on it. And I say something on that. And then I say, okay, I said something like, I believe that story is what teaches, so I'm going to walk my talk. And today's good. And I basically say, Doug, today's going to be different and it's going to be weird. You'll be all right. Some of you are going to be upset. There's no PowerPoint or a handout. You'll be fine. Some of you, and I address what I already know. They're all going to, and then they kind of start laughing. They actually look happy that I'm not going to have a PowerPoint. And then I say, I'm going to take you on a journey. And it's something you're not used to, but I want to take you to my tiny town and let you see what we learned about about the power of story. So I set them up completely to receive it. Now, fast forward a month later or whatever, I'm in payroll, closing keynote. They want the show. I didn't do any of that. Turned off the lights, had all these sparkly things look like gold coins, and you heard this voice I paid on Fiverr say in the middle of a tiny, that sounds like Vincent Price, beyond where you have been, there sits and it sets up this whole thing about the coin. I walk out and I say it was 3 years ago when the coin started showing up in our town. And I didn't worry as much about it because my client wanted the show. So that's how I am doing. And I will guarantee you, one of my friends was in that audience for payroll. And she said, and she's very blunt, and she's New York, she's just New York. She's hardcore. She's whatever. She's not storytelling. And she said, when you first started, she said, I thought there is no way I'm going to be able to sit through 45 minutes of this. And she said, but then you started and I got sucked in. And by the end of it, I was thinking, who can I call and see if they can book Kelly? And Doug, what I have to realize for me, because there's a risk, is they may not understand what I'm doing. And I have to be okay with that because I am taking a colossal risk up on that stage as a speaker. Nobody's doing it this way. It's very weird and very different. And I'm just going to do it and see. I'll be a motivational speaker for a minute. A friend of mine years ago said, what are you doing in your business that you're excited about? Oh, I'm doing this. I'm doing that. He goes, well, you don't sound very excited. I said, no, what I'm excited about is what I'm not doing. And I said, I want to combine fiction and nonfiction and take them to imaginary town, but I step out of it. And he said, well, why aren't you doing it? I said, I think I need to be a big name first. I think I need big stages. I think I need, I need to get big before I can go do that. And he said, did it ever occur to you that it's probably that is going to catapult you to that big stage?
The essence of what you're sharing, though, that's very, very powerful and universal for all of the people listening to this is we hesitate to be who we are organically, as big as we are, as magnificent as we are. We hesitate to go there because we think it won't sell. And at the end of the day, after years and years of not doing that, of not being that, of trying to fit in, of trying to whatever, we finally, at some point later on in life, come to the realization, I'm amazing. Why don't I let them see that? Why don't I just let them see that and let them decide whether this is cool? Let them decide. I'm not going to decide before they ever get to see my magnificence. And that's what I'm seeing with you is, like I said, when I saw you, I thought there's no one like this. That's your value. And yet we're afraid of it because it's like, well, you're quirky. You're weird. You're different. You've got a fairy tale. You've got an imaginary town. What are people in Minnesota going to think of this? What are engineers going to think of this? You and I will get hired specifically by the most boring people in the world because they know they're boring. And they know they need story. And the only way we're going to pull them out of their stuck place, their cerebral place, their data place, is to draw them so far into story that they experience it. And then we come back and say, what did you just experience while I was telling that story? Were you engaged? Were you checking your phone for email? Were you with me? Were you inside my story? And when we debrief like that and they go, yeah, I was. Well, then you can do that too. And now we've got some place to take them because we have to force them to experience it. And for everybody listening to this thinking, well, I can't do what Kelly does. She's theatrical. She's funny. She sings her stories. I can't do that. Yes, you can. Would you agree with me? They can. Now, they can't do it at the level you can do it, or at the level I can do it because I had years of theater and rock and roll and all kinds of crazy stuff that elevated me and illuminated me and set me free. But they can still do it. I've done it with them.
Yeah.
I've worked with people who are engineers. I've worked with people who are boring, and they get up there and all of a sudden I've given them permission and I go, well, what the hell? I'm going to give it a shot. And everybody's like, where the hell did that come from? Well, that was inside of me.
And people, yes, to everything you're saying. And people love a story, and they love it when people speak from the heart. And so, I mean, you can be just as moved by somebody who gets up there and simply tells something that happened in their life that day. You know, I mean, it's very moving. People love stories,
And they love feeling.
and it's in, you're right, it's in there. Yes, we can all, well, we can't all, it's hard to play on stage and to come out of all that. And, but you're right. People can do it. They can let that person out. And also there are stories in there already that if I said, what would you do if you were brave? What did you do when you were brave? What was the hardest thing you ever went through? When have you been the most afraid you have ever been in your life? What's one thing you learned as a teenager that you would never do? They're already in there. And when you start pulling them out of people, they don't realize that they have stories in there. They just need the guidance in how to pull it out and tell it to the world. And they're more interesting than they think, is what I'm trying to say there. And only story can do that. All of us in our businesses, no matter what we do, we're trying to convince somebody else to do something. And in our life, we are taking on the role of a salesperson in some way, trying to raise awareness, get promoted, whatever. And the first thing they buy is you. And too many people go into a speech or a sales conversation, and they just put on the face, and they didn't let us get a chance to get to know who they are and what their story is. And you don't even have to do that well to have you should do it well, but to have a profound impact on your audience, they've got to buy you first. I've seen people where I walked away and I went, that's great. Your audience just fell in love with a great video presentation, and your face was in the dark the whole time. You need them to go away falling in love with you, like they've got a new friend. And that's where storytelling really also helps.
So tell us a story.
It was about another job where I was at, and it was like 0 o'clock. And I'm getting out of my car to go give another program, and I'm juggling with my briefcase and my coffee, and I'm in a funk, and it's cold and rainy outside. I mean, we're not always in a good mood, you know, like you think when you see us on the stage. And I go across this parking lot to go inside the building, and I can hear this woman singing, some sweet morning when this day is over, I'll fly away. Her loud staccato, jubilant notes of a life well lived. And the automatic glass doors opened up, and I could see this woman, and she is standing there holding her mop as if it were a beloved dance partner, as if her faded cotton dress were made of the finest silk. I sat in the corner of the lobby because I was early. I needed to get my notes prepared. I think I'm delivering a program on, I don't know, customer service, something like that. And I couldn't even focus on my notes because I kept watching this woman. And it didn't matter. I wasn't being rude because she was oblivious to everyone around her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world for her to be dancing and singing and twirling her way across the marbled floors of her hospital lobby, while the beeps of the monitors and the dings of the elevators sang to her in sweet harmony. And all of a sudden, I could smell the perfume of my changed perspective as I watched this woman turn her job into an art. Now, she didn't know I was in the restroom later that morning to watch her stop what she was doing. And she went over to a stranger and she laid hands on them and prayed for their wounded child. You don't see that a lot, even in the South. She didn't know that I saw her later that day, help that elderly gentleman wrap the shawl tighter around his wife's shoulders. She didn't know that I saw her give away part of her lunch. But I watched all throughout that day in those cold, unexpected, antiseptic corners of that hospital, and I saw pain find healing. I watched sorrow meet comfort, and I saw hopelessness find hope. Right there, all wrapped up in her faded cotton dress and comfortable shoes. Some sweet morning, when this day is over, I'll fly away. She was still singing all the way to the parking lot when she went to meet her bus at dusk. And I'm standing in front of their window, you know, that big bay glass window, watching her go, wishing that she wouldn't, wondering if I would ever see her again. And I haven't. And I'm standing by their sign. Oh, you know the sign, floor to ceiling, slick sign, no doubt created by a group of marketing intellectuals. And the sign said quite simply, excellence starts here. And I wondered if their CEO knew just how true that really was. You see, that day, on an ordinary, unsuspecting day, that woman taught me more about serving customers than I had to teach my audience. That day, a woman who smelled of bleach and blessings reminded me that happiness, peace, contentment, a love for what you do and why you do it isn't something that somebody else gives you, brings you, tells you, puts on a certificate. She wasn't singing because she had the best job in the place. No, that was a story she was writing. And I believe if you write that story enough, one day you'll wake up and it just is. A woman with a mop showed me what it looks like to serve, and that you can't care about your customers until you care about your customers. That woman showed me how every single person in your organization has the power, the privilege to impact and influence every single person who crosses your path. I'm convinced that that woman did as much, if not more, than anybody in that place to make a connection with the people coming in. Because at the end of the day, we don't do business with buildings, services, fancy signs, brochures. We do business with people. And someday you may be the only face they see. What a privilege. Excellence does start here. Yeah, I got all that from a woman with a mop. And the funny thing is, she had no idea. But I think if a woman with a mop can sing like that, so can we. I'm at this hospital event and I just told that story. And everybody clears out and one person stays back waiting. You've been there. Everybody goes and there's one person waiting to talk to you. Tall man. He comes up, he's stooped over, his eyes are red. He said, "Ma'am, do you have a moment?" I said, "Yes, sir, I do. How can I help you?" And he said, "I just need you to know something." I said, "What?" He said, "I'm the woman with the mop." And I knew exactly what he meant. He said, "I've been working in maintenance at this hospital going on 40 years. He said, "And I don't believe anybody's ever made me feel important for what I do until today. Thank you." And he shuffled off. And I got in my car and I thought about that moment. And I thought, how is it that me, a stranger, nothing like this man, our walks have been completely different, could get up here and impact him and make him feel valued in a way that his CEO or leadership has not been able to do for 40 years. That is not on me. That is the power of a story. Yeah.
Well, we take a true story and then we craft it and then we develop it and then we sing the heck out of it, which you just did. But what I wanted to say is to all of my listeners, I want you to rewind this podcast back to the beginning of that story and listen to it again. I want you to listen to all of the gems that were in there in the crafting and the writing, the beautiful turns of phrase, the brilliant use of language and alliteration and imagery. There were so many brilliant little things in there, and they don't happen unless you take the time and have the reverence for your story to sit down and say, how could I paint this picture? What words would be better than other words? What turn of phrase would be just so elegant? What would be the lyric that I can write here that will just be, it'll give me permission to sing it when I'm telling the story? Because that's what I heard. I mean, as a story analyst, strategist, I listen to that and I go, oh, good one. Okay. Oh, that was good. Oh, that was nice. And I'm continually hearing all that. And I believe that audiences listening to something like that are having the same experience I am, not at the level I am, because I'm analyzing.
Right. Right.
And breaking down and saying, how can I use this as a teaching moment? But I think they're listening to the story too, and they're going, oh, the beeping of the monitors, the ding of the elevator. Ooh, that was good. I think they're going through the same experience, just as little. And it's just like watching a movie. They're inside the lobby. They're experiencing what you're experiencing. They're seeing it through your eyes. So I want everybody to just rewind this, go back and listen to Kelly telling that story once again, because that is mastery. That's what it takes. It takes a reverence. It takes a love and a respect for story to take the time to craft it. But here's the reason why. Why would you do that? Why would you take the time to sit down and craft a story and obsess about this word or this turn of phrase? Because when you do that, you are memorable. You not only make a difference, but you are memorable. It can change your career. It can literally change your career. People will look at you differently than they've ever looked at you, and they'll say, that's leadership material. Let's keep an eye on her. Let's keep an eye on him. Would you agree?
I would agree. And they see themselves in your story. So yes, they appreciate to some degree. Oh, I like what you did. They like the song and can appreciate the music, but they also are thinking of their mother or their grandmother or the lady they know. Sometimes I'll go to an audience and we'll talk about that story and where your brain went and who you thought about. And it is unbelievable where everybody just went on an emotional level. It's just super powerful. I love it, or I laugh when when a meeting planner says, but are you interactive? Like, are you kidding me? I'm going to take them further than anybody who made them draw on their hand or turn to their neighbor. They get to take this when you can see their faces. With the payroll group, I got to go see the video and they'd filmed their faces, and it was very humbling for me because I could see the laughter and the way they were touched and what they were feeling and the tears and the crying. One lady came up to me at the end. Well, there were several, but one came with the coin in her hand. And then the coin says, what would you do if you were brave? And she had tears in her eyes. And she says, I got my coin. Okay, this is all based on a fictitious town, on a coin that landed there, and what an imaginary character did with their coin. And this lady's coming up to me, and she said, it's at the book table or whatever, and she leaned in, and she had tears in her eyes. She said, I got my coin, and I will. She bought it. I sold the coin, didn't even give it to her. She bought it. She said, I've got it. And she was holding it like it was a lifeline, which it was. She said, I just want you to know that before I came here today to this conference, I was planning my exit strategy. And you've given me the courage to keep pedaling. My final story about Grandpa and Douglas is that the message is just keep pedaling, just keep pedaling. And she said, I'm going to keep pedaling. And I said, oh, that's great. You're retiring, exit strategy. And she went, no, that's not what I mean by exit strategy. So here is a woman, and that is not Kelly. I mean, that is what a story can do, is that she stepped in it and walked away with the courage to keep living her life. I probably would have spent a little bit more time on the story had I known they were going to take it that seriously. But I mean, that is what is, I can't believe people don't realize what a powerful tool they have right here at their disposal.
Now, I want to talk for a moment about being present.
Mm-hmm.
There is a challenge that people can have when they're new to speaking, or they're not used to being at the front of the room, and they're nervous about it, and they have a story to tell, and they've worked on it. And yet once they get up there and they start presenting it, they see these faces staring back at them and they get scared. And they start to edit themselves out, or cut the story, or cut it short, or whatever. But you and I know, if we step in front of a story and we've got a story and that story is 10 minutes long, we're going to do that story and it's going to be 10 minutes long, and we're going to be present within that story every single second. We're working it. We're busy. We're singing the hell out of this. We're trying to hit the notes. Mm-hmm. And what I appreciate most about what you do and the theater of it is, if you were playing a concert piano concerto thing, if you're out there in a concert, you're not thinking about the audience. You're playing, you're busy. And when you're telling a story, you're busy, you're working, and you have no time to be interpreting what's going on in the audience, whether they like it or not. The time for reflection about how well did that go is afterwards. When people come up to you and they say, that changed my life, that impacted me in this way, and they share it with you, not just with words, but with emotion. And that's when we can validate ourselves and go, okay, I'm sticking to my guns. When I get up there and I'm committed to my story, I'm just going to do it the way that I do it. And some of them will like it. Some of them will love it. Some of them will be bored as hell and go, come on, please get to the point.
Yeah,
they're not our job.
But, and being present too, one thing I'll say about being nervous, and some of that just comes with is stage time. It's not until you're, it's so much is mental up here. And when you're truly comfortable to full out comfortable and relaxed to play, and you're owning that stage and it's your playground, it takes a while to get there. And that's how I am with Pride's Hollow. I didn't choose this because I thought this is going to be the most marketable thing I can do.
Right.
By a long shot. In fact, that was the reason I stayed away from it so long. I do it because it's in my soul. These people make me laugh. I am at my highest level of joy when I'm telling you their stories. And so I just got to do it. And like you said, hope it's enough people, will like it. Now, I didn't have an acting background, for the record. So when people would say act, that would scare me. And, my acting friends would say, I was like, I'm not acting. And they're like, well, acting isn't acting, it's reacting authentically. And I think sometimes people can go in the wrong direction when they think they need to act something out, as well. But just standing inside the story and living it again and reacting to what you see. I don't know that I could do Shakespeare because I can only do Kelly, but
that acting is recreating a moment from another time and bringing it forward into this moment. When you do your stories and you are inside the story, You're basically taking that moment from then and bringing it into this moment and recreating it. Well, that is acting. You're living the characters, you're breathing the characters, but you're not just telling it. You're feeling it, you're experiencing it, you're seeing the environment that you're in. I call it, creating scenes. And then stepping into the scene, stepping into the environment and being in that environment. You do that organically. Now, you might shudder at the word acting,
Right.
but
Right.
that's what it is.
But
It is
I
acting.
do
It
it
is
as
acting
me.
out the moment, but acting is not false.
Right. And I do it as me.
Yeah,
And sometimes you'll see speakers or storytellers who are acting. I shouldn't use the word acting because I don't know what other word to use, because I make acting sound like that's a bad word, but it's not. You can act it out, but do it in a way that it still is you.
but that's what acting is, acting it out.
That's what my friend said. That's what acting is. Don't make it sound
Acting
like
is acting out the moment.
yeah.
It's
You're
breathing
right.
life into the character. It's taking them away from my greatest gift to an audience is I basically say, I've got you. You're coming with me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I take them with me. That's what Once Upon a Time does. That's what
Yep.
movies do. And so the gift of this ability to discover Kelly in front of an audience, to embrace the organic background that you have from the Carolinas and from your background, and to be able to say, I can make that relevant.
Yeah.
I don't have
Yeah.
to be some other guy. I don't have to be Peter Senge, or I don't have to be Tony Robbins, or I don't have to be, some other Brene Brown. I don't have to be any of those people. I can take what I have and work it and work it and work it and love it and embrace it, but also strategically figure out, but what does it teach?
Yes.
What is the
Yes.
relevance of it?
What's the
And
purpose? You break the fourth wall. Why are you telling this story?
Yes. So let's find a way to conclude here by talking about what it is that you do and how people can contact you. What kinds of things that you offer to people in the world. I mean, you've got your book. You've got a number of books.
Well, I think the simplest is the community I've created online that's free to join on storyimpactnetwork.com. So you just go to storyimpactnetwork.com. I'm just trying to build my own place that's not Facebook, that's not, Instagram, that's just a place where lovers of story can gather and talk about story. And I think that's what my website, you can Google me and find out more about me there. I'm always doing something different. Theater shows coming up. Pride's Hollow is going to be Who Hijacked My Fairy Tale Was My Story. Pride's Hollow is their story, and that's going to be launched in October. So send me a lot in High Point, North Carolina. So send a lot of warm energy and prayers headed my way, because I'm scared, but I'm going to do it. It's time, and it'll find its place. But we'll see.
Well, you're kind of following in Jeannie's footsteps in the way that she went from being a keynote speaker all over the place to starting to do theater shows.
Yeah.
And
it's so lovely because the theater shows are how I want to do my keynotes. So it's just such a beautiful yin and a yang. I can do both, and sometimes the business client will have me do a version of my theater show at their event. It's all getting muddied. But yeah, that was Jeannie's path as well. I like theater because you just don't have to put a speech in it. You can full out play. But then you got to worry about who's going to show up. Business audience, you're guaranteed an audience. But anyway, I don't want to divert, but it's been an honor to be on this podcast. I mean, you really touched my life and my career a long time ago. You've always had a huge impact on it. You've always been a hero to me. So it's kind of weird now you having me. I mean, it's just whatever, full circle. Yeah, and I appreciate that. And everybody has a story.
Everybody has a story. And I hope that today, those of you listening all over the world, listening to this brilliant woman, sharing her gift. You're hearing her say things that I've been saying in other podcast episodes, but you're hearing it in a new way, and it validates everything that I teach, everything that people who really take storytelling seriously teach. You're hearing it all again, and I'm hoping that you're going to start. Those of you who are listening are going to start listening to what Kelly said and go, I think she's right. I do have a story, and I need to take it more seriously. I need to work on it a little bit and find some of that language, and I need to sing my story. Just sing my story. So, Kelly, it is just such an honor. I have watched your trajectory and watched what you've done to evolve and grow and explore yourself in this business and impact and make a difference in people's lives. And I'm so honored that you chose to be with me today. So thank you very, very much.
So thank you for having me. And thanks everybody for listening.
All right.